All right, so for lesson two, we're going to talk about slope and writing linear equations, which this is also review, but you're going to see this a ton in Algebra 1, so I think it is not at all going to hurt to spend a little bit more time on it. And this is going to help a lot with going into lesson three if you have this good solid foundation, because we really haven't talked about this for several months, so this is some pretty good review for you. So our learning targets today, we're going to try to keep it nice and simple. First, we're going to try to identify slope from a graph and then identify slope from an equation. And then we're going to write linear equations by looking at a graph. So we're going back into that y equals mx plus b world. Okay, so for identifying slope from a graph, our first learning target, we need to remember what slope is. So we talked a lot about slope earlier in the year, but just remember that it's rise over run, or we could also describe it as the change in y over the change in x. This is a little scientific symbol. Usually we use it in science. That means change in. So it just means change in y, right? How is the line changing as we go up and down? And change in x, how is the line changing as we go side to side? So in this first one right here, we have 2 points that are identified. Remember, we always want to pick 2 points, and we're going to pick the vertical change from that point and then go over to the horizontal change. So it's kind of like we're drawing little triangles, right, on these problems. So if I start at this point down here, I'm going to go straight up, and that looks like I'm going up about 4 units vertically, and then I'm going to go horizontally 1 unit. So remember, we could write this as like my change in y is a positive 4. And then my change in x is a positive 1, right? Because I'm going in the positive y direction and then in the positive x direction. So when I write that as rise over run, my rise is 4 and my run is 1. So I could either leave that as 4 over 1, or we know that 4 divided by 1 is just 4. So my slope for this graph is just going to be 4. Now on number 2, or on the second equation here, we are not given any points. So remember that when we're not given points, we need to pick our own, and we can pick any 2 points on the graph as long as they're kind of overlapping with the grid, right? So I don't want to pick, for example, a point that's in the middle of a square. I want to pick a point that lands right on the corner of each one of those squares. So I see one right here where I'm hovering my laser over it right now. So I'm going to highlight that with kind of a little blue dot there. And then I need to find another one. There's quite a few that I can see here. That I see one right here. I see another one right here overlapping with the corners. I believe even all the way where this arrow is over here is another one where it overlaps with the corner. So I'm going to go ahead and select this one right here, just for the sake of this example. So if I count, right, I always want to count from left to right. And I'm going to go up and down first. So to get from this far left point right here, I'm going to have to go down 2 units, right? So that was a change of -2 because I went down 2. And then to get from this corner all the way over to this point over here, it looks like, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. I'm going +6, right? Because I'm going in the positive x direction. So I went down 2 and over +6. So that gives me a rise of -2 and a run of +6. Now, if I simplify that fraction, it looks like I can divide the top and the bottom both by 2. So this fraction is not equal to 3, right? Because we have that bigger number on the bottom. But if I divide top and bottom by 2, I get a -1 on the top and a +3 on the bottom. So my fraction, or my slope, is going to be -1/3. I just wanted to remind you guys really quickly, if you were in Miss Allen's class, we did this little guy called Slope Dude, where we did, this guy's on the ski trip, he's having a good day, he's going up, and so his slope is positive. He skis down the hill, and he's sad that his day is about to be over, so that's negative. And then when he gets to the bottom and the hill is flat, he says this is zero fun. But then suddenly he gets to the end of the cliff and, you know, things happen. So this is called undefined. So just remember, I wanted to remind you that if there's a flat line, it means that the slope is 0, right? And there's no change in y. And if the line is going straight up and down, it's undefined, which means that we can't define the change in y. So now we're going to identify slope from an equation, which was our second learning target of the day. So remember, we said that our slope was m. And I'm really trying to keep this as simple as possible. We spent a lot more time on this earlier in the year, but remember, we have this equation, y equals mx plus b, and we say that our slope is just always going to be m. So it's always going to be the number that's like next to or attached to or multiplying the x. And then remember that this b value is the y-intercept, and we're not going to talk about that quite as much yet, but we'll come to it in just a moment. So here you'll see in this equation, y equals 4x plus 8, if we want to highlight or identify the y-intercept, that's just going to be the number that's right next to the x, right? If I'm trying to figure out what m is. So I could even just go through all of these equations right now and highlight what's the number that's right next to the x. That's my m value. So I'm going to write down what my m value is on that first one. It's just 4. A really common thing that I see students doing is saying that their m equals 4x. But remember that x is its own thing, right? We only want to talk about the m value, and the m value here is just 4. So we leave that x off. On the second one, we have -1/3, and on the third one, we have just a value of +2. So we don't put the x next to our slope. So when you plug stuff in on your forms for your exit task today, just put the number of m, don't add an x in there. All right, so our final topic or our final portion of our learning target is remembering how to write linear equations from a graph, which we have over here. So I'm going to keep this little graphic up that tells us that m is our slope and b is our y-intercept. And remember, the two steps are just we have to find our slope and we have to find our y-intercept. So the slope, m, is going to be our rise over run, but I'm actually going to skip down and start with the y-intercept, which is where the red line crosses over the y-axis. So if I look at my red line here, right, it's just kind of doing its thing, and then here's the y-axis, and it looks like the red line and the y-axis are overlapping right at this point 5 right there. So remember, you're always going to want to find that just by looking at the y-axis and the line. So it should be pretty quick and pretty easy to find. It's not, you don't have to like do math for it, you just look and see where it is. So then for the slope, for rise over run, we're going to have to count out our triangle, our vertical change and our horizontal change, just like we were doing. But you'll notice that there are no points on this graph again, right? So I'm going to have to kind of pick out some of my own points. So I went ahead and just labeled all of the points that overlapped with the corners that I could see. And I know this is kind of tricky. My points didn't end up exactly perfectly on the grid. But you should notice when you start to pick out points that they should end up in a pattern, right? Because linear equations have patterns, and that's where the slope comes from. So I'm just going to pick some random two. I think I'm going to go from this one over to this 0.5 up here. So my vertical change, it looks like I have a change of 1, 2, 3, 4. So that's a +4 change. And then my horizontal change is going over +2. And notice my horizontal change line is not perfect there, but it should be approximately up 4 and over 2. Well, not approximately, it should be exactly up 4 over 2. So then when I put that into my slope, my rise over run, my rise is 4 and my run is 2. But if I divide the top and bottom by 2, I get 2 over 1, or you could even just think of it as 4 divided by 2. So my slope could just be 2. So then I just take both of those numbers and I put them into my equation, right? My slope m is 2, y equals 2x plus b, and we said my b was 5. So my final equation is going to be 2x plus 5. All right, I just wanted to show you one final example here, and this is actually the graph that we saw on one of our earlier examples. So we've already found the slope from it. So I'm just going to remind you guys that we discovered our slope was -1 and +3, right? So our slope would be -1/3, okay? Then for the b value, which is the y-intercept, I'm just going to look over to where the y-axis intersects with that line there, and it looks like that's happening right at 3, at that point 3 on y. So I'm going to write my line, literally just fill in the equation, right? Y equals -1/3 x plus 3. And that's all for today.